Hi guys, and welcome back. Today we get on with the painting and weathering of the M26 Pershing, otherwise known for this diorama as the Haladonian Dugite. So the first thing to do is to get on with the priming, and I just did a bit of a practice on the base of the hull first of all to make sure I was happy with what we were going to get. And this is a Vallejo acrylic surface primer, so that's 74.602 black. So I think I said it before, I love the way this goes down, and it really does seem to give a nice coating for the paint to grip onto. Always like to do the wheels off the model so I can make sure I get into all the nooks and crannies. And then on to the full metal track, so again just using the black acrylic primer to kick things off, making sure you get into all the little gaps and the guide horns and all that sort of stuff. And then make sure you flip sides so you come at it from the other angle so there's no parts that don't get coverage. Now just before I'd done the priming, I had realised that I'd forgotten to do the taillights, which is something I'd meant to do at the end of the build and just completely forgotten. So it was just a matter of having a look at how to make that look like it was an integrated part of the tank, and just created a little plastic sleeve, I guess, to cover the pathway from the front of the lights to the entrance to the lower hull. So I was quite happy with how that looked, but I had created a problem for myself that I didn't find out about till much later on. Here just cutting the hole in the bottom of the lower hull at the front for the on-off switch. Wiring up the switch. I'm starting to get a little bit more organised with my wiring now, and I'm colour coding it, as you can see, with some electrical tape so I don't get confused further down the track. And found these really magnificent tiny little jeweller's watchmaker screws. There, the lights, tail lights working. And just took some impressions there to make the glass part of the tail lights. So the first colour on is dark Prussian blue, and this is from the Vallejo Next Gen paints. Sprays really well, don't have to thin it at all, and pretty impressed, although a bit delicate, so it can react to the next coat if you don't let it dry long enough. And just splotching on the dark blue, and then having a look at bringing up the colours a little bit lighter, so going for a sort of loose dot camouflage type approach. This is all inventive out of my mind, so most of it being made up as I go along. And what I tried to do was get a bit of a splatter effect with this, so hold the airbrush down, so I've got the pressure down incredibly low, and I'm holding it down to release the air, but no paint's coming out. But then when I violently let my finger go from the trigger, a little bit of paint will spurt out. Now, that hasn't always worked, some of them are better than others, but I was overall happy with the effect. We'll have a look at a few close-up pictures of the spatter parts that I particularly like. Some places it's coming out really well. And I think these bits are close to my favourite. So back to the tracks, and I guess the story behind the diorama is the Dugite tank is pretty much fresh out of the factory, so I was comfortable with just the black base paint on the tracks because they should be relatively new. And then I thought I'd just scrape off some areas where there'd be the natural wear and tear just going through the return rollers, etc. Now this first track that I attacked way too vigorously and ended up having to put some black paint back on and fixing it up a little bit. Plus, as you can see, one of the pins came out, so it wasn't overly secure. And then on the second track, rather than attack it with the Q-tip and the water, I just used the sanding stick very lightly and was much happier. A far more subtle result, but I think a far more realistic result. When I went back and repainted the first one that I attacked and mutilated, it came up pretty well. So now just using a little bit of the MIG pigment. This is the European Earth. Nice soft brush. Only use this brush for pigments. And pretty self-explanatory, just brush it on. Now again, I'm looking for a dusty look. I'm not looking for a muddy look or a very heavily worn or battle damaged scenario. So you can see what's going on here. I'll pop back in as I need to. Once I've got it all down, I'll then hit it with the airbrush to blow up any of the surplus, and then I was flip it over time and to do the other side. I'm a bit more conscious of making sure I work it into all of the gaps and cracks between the tracks. It's a little rhyme for you. Then just working it in amongst the back of the wheels and the return rollers onto the wheels themselves and just dusting them up again as well. In the same process, get it down, blow it off with the airbrush, and then in this case the next step would be to seal it with the airbrush, and I just use a dull clear varnish, and again that removes some of it, so it looks too much when you put it down, but when you finish that process of blowing it off and then sealing it in with the dull clear, it doesn't look too bad. So by putting on the taillight, I'd inadvertently created a fit issue that there was plastic in a spot where the kit designers never intended it to be. So not a huge disaster, just really had to carve away from the rear fender enough material so that it would eventually fit on. So I thought I'd have to take that much off, but I ended up having to cut up woods a lot more. And I was contemplating filling it, but then I thought, you know what, I think it looks fine the way it is. Now, another issue that emerged that I wasn't expecting was that the micro LEDs were drawing too much power, so I couldn't run the two headlights and the two taillights off the one battery, so I had to make another battery case, and this actually went through a bit of modification over the journey, and have a separate switch for the taillights coming up through the rear deck and a separate switch at the front for the headlights. So probably more logical in their setup, and then they're independent to operate. Here they all work. Now the reason it looks a bit dodgy is because it's got mask all over it, so I won't damage it with the paint. And speaking of damaged paint, of course, when I removed the tape that was holding the upper hull to the lower hull, I was stupid and slack and pulled a big chunk off the front hull. Now you all know that if you try and touch that up, it's going to be horrible and it will be visible, and unless you strip the whole front back, it's going to look nasty. So my solution was that the company emblem would go on a metal plate that was screwed into the front hull, which conveniently covered that, so you'll see that a little bit further on. So now on with all the stowage and other bits and bobs that need to be done. So I think you've suffered enough hearing me drone on for the last 8 minutes or so. I'll give you a bit of music and I'll pipe up a couple of times where I think I need to. Now with the wooden boxes, I'm giving them a wash of the German black brown. I like that to darken up all of the crevices, and a reasonably diluted wash, so a fair bit of water in there, big soft brush. And one of the things I try and do with the first wash is to go across the grain, and I just think that helps it find the low spots a little bit easier, and you tend not to wipe it out of the low spots as you're doing it. And then once that's dry, I then come in with a very diluted black wash, and this one I do with the grain just to mix it up a little bit, because I don't mind taking some of this material out as I put it in. I don't want it to overpower the wood tones that have already been put in there. So with the grain for the black wash against the grain for the dark brown wash. And then to finish all that off, I go with the light colour here, Iraqi sand, for this one, but I'm not fixated about it. And then just do some dry brushing, try to bring out the highlights, so not much paint on the brush and a very light touch. So I thought I'd simulate some glass in the viewpoints around the cupola, and just using the UV cured glue, just put a tiny little amount in there and spread it across. I didn't want it really thick, I just wanted it to have that little bit of a sheen to it, which will be really dulled down anyway after the matte spray and the weathering's done. And then hit it with the UV light for probably about 5 to 10 seconds. So now just removing the blue tack from the on-off switches that was protecting them from all the paint, and gluing on the, I guess, the camouflage that will hide the switches underneath some boxes or helmets or whatever, putting on the hatches and basically all the other little bits and pieces. So you can see all this. I'll be back in a tick. So I didn't like the way the ammunition containers were just floating on the edge there. I thought that was pretty unrealistic, so I decided to make my own cable to secure it, and just used a bit of spare PE to create a couple of little hooks, and spun together maybe half a dozen of the really fine wires that come out of the plastic coated wiring for the lighting. Not unhappy with it. Just mucking around now with the spare tracks, a few pictures of the different stowage on the back. And then I decided to go a bit medieval and found these magnificent resin shields online, Albion Forgotten World Fireforge. And in particular, I was looking for the Rampant Lion, and I'd mocked up a shield because my thinking is some of the lore around the Haladonian military is that commanders still have a shield that's partly tradition and partly because made from velenium they'll resist most small arms fire and actually can be used in combat. So rather than just have the shield painted onto the side of the turret, it's a working piece of equipment and a part of their combat gear. And then just a quick piece of butchery with a jack from, I think, the Matilda kit as well, to make a arm for it to hang on. So in the home straight now, just preparing for the decals by giving it a gloss coat. I always do that because I just think they move nicer. I know there's often fierce debate about the value of it, but if it works for you, I say do it. These are printed on my colour laser printer on white gloss decal paper. Resolution at this scale is okay, but not brilliant, and I'm sure that's more to do with my printer or my lack of knowledge on the settings. So I prepare the surface with the solver set, get the decal on, smooth it in with a Q-tip, and then put a little bit more solver set on top of it, and in fact we'll come back over and over again over probably the course of the rest of that day and night. Every time I just think about it, I'll wander back into the cave and put a little bit more softening solution on it just to help them to conform to the surface. And then to just bring it all together, I use the European Earth again, the pigments. And to start with here, I use a brush that my daughter kindly donated to me, a makeup brush, but it's incredibly soft and less likely to break anything on the actual model when you're doing the contact. So I just sprinkle it on, a bit like seasoning. Now you think, oh wow, he's putting way too much on. But I use the same approach as I did with the wheels. I come back in with the airbrush and just blast air through it. There's nothing in the airbrush. And that gets off all the very loose surface stuff. And then another little brush that she gave me just to get some more of it off. So I'm putting a lot on, but then I'm progressively taking quite a lot of it off. I reckon I've probably taken 80% of it off. And the 20% that's left is smoothed into the crevices, into the low points and the like. And then I'll come in with a smaller brush, equally as soft, and get a little bit more specific about where I do further smoothing, and that again removes some more. And of course, once this is all done, then hit it with the airbrush again to blow off any residue, and then finally hit it again with the airbrush with the dull clear. And that also removes a little bit more of it and brings it all in together. And so that's it. Final review. We'll spin around on the magic wheel a couple of times and then have some close-up photos. Great fun to paint, no constraints, just making it up as I went along, and really, really happy with the outcome. So sit back and enjoy, and I'll come back and say goodbye. So thanks for watching, and like and share, subscribe and click the bell if you haven't already done that, and as always look forward to your comments, and I will catch you in the next one, which will be a little bit different.